Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of the Data Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by Phil Bailey. We're going to be discussing how to build for success, and we're also going to cover some of the confusion at the moment going on around role titles, whether that be from the candidates or the client's perspective, and just how that's impacting people during the recruitment process. So Phil's a data leader, but also a hands-on developer, architect. He's wore many hats across his career, so he's in a great position to give his view on this. So yeah, if you want to give a bit of an overview of yourself, Phil, and we'll go from there.
Sure, thanks Richard, and hello everybody. So Phil Bailey, I've been in data and BI for about 25 years now, and as Richard said, I've had lots of different roles in consultancy, development, enterprise data architects, etc. So I've been part of many different companies and industries, etc. And I've also done my fair share of hiring as well, which is why we can have this conversation. I've seen plenty of different operating models around, some that work better than others, some that don't work so well. And obviously, what we can talk about today is the fact that I've just recently been on my own hiring experience, job hunting experience, because I've been made redundant due to COVID. I've been sat reading lots of job specs and stuff that some of which I found difficult to understand, to be honest, because a lot has changed in the last 3 or 4 years, and lots of new terminologies are coming out, different roles, etc. So obviously I've been trying to make sense of those, and some of them plainly don't make that much sense. And I think some companies are struggling to define what they want as well. So have you had an experience like that yourself, Richard?
Yeah, I think it's a big problem, and that's why obviously when we first had our chat, I think this became a really important issue to tackle. I think as roles have developed, as time's gone on, there's been more and more role titles come about, and I think it leads to a lot of confusion, not only on the candidate side searching for a role, but also from a hiring manager and a business perspective. And it's interesting to try and think about how that's come about and what we can potentially do to tackle that. I mean, could you give any examples from your recent search of where that's happened?
Yeah, I think people use role descriptions. They expect a lot out of one role description. That's one common theme I'm seeing. People expect almost like a single person team, somebody to do absolutely every role.
It's the unicorn.
Exactly. Whereas previously there's been quite a good separation of role titles. But I think this new one is meaning different things to different people. And then there's also job type, just the job title as well can often mean different things in different companies. So again, adding to the confusion a little bit. And I think generally, I don't know whether it's due to the COVID situation, but companies seem to want a lot out of one person. So
I don't know whether it's down to budget constraints. I think sometimes it is. I think sometimes the hiring manager is just hands are tied, nothing they can do about it, and they have to have these skills. I also think it could be down to a company's ambition to get hold of data, make the most of it, and let's do it all now. And I think when that happens, these specs come about that involve, we want a data visualization expert that can also do the data warehousing, and then do some client facing stuff, and then look at the database tuning and the DBA. So and before you know it, you've got a unicorn that is either paid an absolute fortune for some of the biggest companies out there, or simply doesn't exist and will never be found. And I think it can be really difficult to try and explain that to companies. And I suppose it can be down to maybe just a misunderstanding of what's out there. But like I say, also it can come down to, right, we want everything right now. And sometimes if they take a little bit of a step back and maybe look at a bit of a longer journey, then that can be achieved. But I also think from the candidate's perspective, it's really hard to know where to position yourself. What am I? And I think one of the, you asked sort of, have I found similar things? I think one of the things that have come up from candidates a number of times with me is they start spreading their skill set very thin. So they they start off with strengths in one area, and suddenly before you know it, they're a bit of this, a bit of that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think it leads to the confusion, and it can be difficult to then know, what should I be doing? What is my role when I look at these titles?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So so I thought that basically when you step back, you see there's a bit of an opportunity. I think companies have started describing themselves really well in terms of their journey. Trying to using the job spec as more of a selling tool. I think that's definitely coming across. But what they're not doing, and I think there's an opportunity for, is for them to make it really engaging in terms of describing what kind of team they'll be joining. And the analogy we're going to talk about, once we look at that analogy, you'll see that if you can sort of describe what context you're going to be sat in a better way, it can be much more attractive for candidates. The story is one thing, but definitely number two is, well, who am I going to be working with? Who are my colleagues going to be? What are the dynamics in that team, which you often can only sort of get a little feeling from the standard job spec.
I think a great example of this in terms of a specific role would be, data engineer and data scientist that's come in, and there's a lot of crossover. A lot of the time they're sort of BI development roles or something that are made to look like a data engineer because it's maybe a new and exciting title. And this is where the blurred lines really start to come in. And I think you're 100% right. If there's a way to simplify that a little bit, and I think we spoke about sort of unification and trying to get a way that everyone speaks the same language, and it can be applied to many different situations. And I think that's what we're gonna show with the example that we have, for sure.
I think so. As alongside that, as the company's being able to describe the team better, as you said earlier, it's also helps if you frame it with something, then it helps for you to say where you would fit in that as well. So, as we look at the analogy, I'll describe how I think I could use that analogy to fit into a job spec, if you see what I mean. So we can look at
it becomes like a bit of a tool as well from a data leader's perspective. It's a way to cut through the noise. It's a way to sit down, maybe even analyze, say you're coming into a new business, analyzing where the business is at now, who have we got, where do the skills lie, where are the gaps, and sometimes looking at it not from role titles but maybe from an analogy like we're going to discuss can make a big difference. So yeah, it's very interesting. So I think what's best now, if I share the I think I'll share the screen just to show a little diagram that Phil's put together, and that we'll be able to talk through that. 1 second. Perfect. Can you see that, Phil?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not difficult to guess what the analogy is. Like a Premiership football team or something like that. And obviously the point here is, you've got to have a think about what kind of analogy works for yourselves, what will resonate with people that you're working with. It could be sport, another different sport. It could be a military type of setup. It could be something from politics, looking at campaigns and stuff like that. Anything that you think might work. And it's really just to make a bit of fun out of it. But it's more than that. It's to give that framework, as we just said, where you're going to hang your hats. And where if you look at this analogy now, I can quite easily tell you that I am a bit of a manager there and a bit of a midfielder. So I've had the data architect roles, and I've had the BI manager roles, and straight away, what that also says is what I'm not as well. So I'm not one of your strikers. I used to do in the old days, but now there's people are much better at doing visualizations than I am and making things look really pretty. Same goes for defenders. But guess what? I need those defenders there to support what I do. So I want to know if someone's got my back. I also want to know that I'm going to be feeding good crosses into the strikers.
Yeah.
So you can use all these analogies to talk more sort of flowery about things, in a more constructive conversation. I think if you've got something like this to hang it off, and if you can have that conversation I just think it's a more engaging conversation than
Yeah.
talking about items.
100%, 100%. And if you can come up with something that works for you, that's relevant to the individuals as well, even better. So you see yourself as a midfielder. I know you've worn many hats across your career. So where your strengths would lie in that area, would it?
Yeah, and a bit of the off pitch as well in terms of manager,
Yeah, exactly.
building team, etc. And winning games and supporters, all that flowery stuff you can talk about. And some of the things that we've not talked about yet in the prep, but there's things like stats. So as a midfielder, what would my stats be? How do I measure myself? You could talk about things like that. So there's all kinds of overlays and offshoots that you could use. And I think personally, it could be a bit of fun for the whole team as well. And I think another possible usage for it was for example, if I'm going to be starting a new role soon as a BI manager, and members of my team, I might want to play this past them and say, guys, you're a defender at the moment, but have you ever thought that you might want to be a striker at some point? And you could use it for an aspirational thing.
I think so it's great to use as a tool, maybe a career development tool. Maybe it's all about cutting through the noise and maybe being a bit more interactive with it. And I think what it comes down to is, what do you know now? What do you enjoy doing out of these roles, and where do you see yourself going? And I think forget about the role titles necessarily, forget about where that sits. Focus on the responsibilities, focus on the actions that you'd be doing within that role, and then try and look for that detail within the adverts as well. I think if you're a candidate searching for a role, it is easy to go, oh, well, when I'm not good for that because it's X, Y, Z. I think if you actually look at the ins and outs and try and focus on that area, that's probably the best route to go down.
Exactly. It's what are you good at? That's what begs the question here, doesn't it? Are you a star striker, or are you a world-class goalkeeper? How would you describe yourself? Is what sort of hiring team could ask in an interview. And also, from your perspective, how do you think companies would enjoy putting something like this together in terms of when they're trying to attract people in?
I think it's such a big issue at the moment for companies, for leaders when they're trying to build out a team, is how to structure it. And I think a lot of people have spoken about this. I think it comes down to initially defining, what do we actually need? Like I said earlier, it's easy to jump into it and say, right, we want data engineers, data scientists, or everyone at once. Let's prioritize it a little bit. Let's look at what we need. But I think it's a great way to plan how the team's structured, potentially, like I said earlier, where the gaps in knowledge are, and sometimes just focusing on the titles may miss that really, and may start to waste resources, or potentially focus on the wrong areas when building a team. But I love the fact that you're moving into a new role, and this is something you're going to approach, the team within there already, so you can see how it could work.
That's right. I can test it out. So I think another good thing to mention that people might be thinking at this point is, well, how do I look at team size and formations and stuff like that? Because how many strikers should you have? How many midfielders? So you can overlay all these questions on top of there. Personally, if you're a sort of medium-sized company, I'd say you probably want more strikers than you need midfielders, and defenders too as well. I think it's probably only one or two defenders, one or two midfielders. You don't tend to have many data architects, for example, in a typical organisation unless you're huge. But then the strikers, you could have one striker per functional area. And those are your sort of analytic superstars in those areas, if you like. So you can draw that out quite easily, quite simply. I think a lot of people would relate to it. So, and you make it yours. That's the thing, isn't it? So
what do you feel is the current go-to? So say you're what's the standard if you're building out a team at the moment? Where do people tend to focus?
Well, I think if you look at the company I'm going to be joining soon, they've hired a defender and a striker at the same time, and then they've got myself as the midfielder and the manager. So you're covering each area there, and importantly, what you're not doing is you're not going off and buying a load of strikers. without the other roles in place.
Which is the easy thing to do, yeah.
Exactly. People get carried away and they miss out at that balance. You know, if you cover what each of those areas, you can't go that far wrong. Whereas if all your strikers are all following the ball trying to get a goal, you know, it's not as balanced, it's not as organised, is it? So it's just using those sort of things that come from, you know, a successful team is not new. There's lots and lots of different examples over the history of great teams being formed. There's lots of reference materials and books and stuff like that. But this is just a way to, you know, to make it come to life, I think, for companies and make everybody else.
Yeah, and I think one of the other sort of analogies we looked at was it the magician, the orchestra. Yeah, go down that route. Yeah.
Yeah, there's terms we were playing. There's lots of different terms you can use. That's probably another analogy, isn't it? So maybe there's you know, all these mystical books that people are into, or you know, there's lots of fun themes you could use an analogy. But so that unicorn spec, as I said early on, that would be one guy running all over the pitch.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the trouble is it just happens all too often. You see it all over the place, and I think the most shocking bit about it is it's never got a massive salary. It's never got the salary that's probably deserved for a role like that, and you start to feel a little bit sorry for maybe someone who does move into a role like that, because surely the pressure is huge. And I know we spoke about it before. It's not even just that. It's actually these individual areas deserve, you know, full focus. They deserve people that are going to give all their time to that area to be able to get the return on it, basically, to be able to be effective.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know. I think in conclusion, I mean, I've said it a number of times now. I think it's a very dry topic if you're just looking at things, you know, line items on the job spec. Stakeholder management. What does it really mean? Well, stakeholder management is a bad example because it's not really drawn out there. I couldn't think how it works in the analogy, but it's part of the manager role, really, partly, and partly a striker role. So, you know, instead of just looking at those dry things, try and map it onto something like this. You know, have a bit of fun with it, make it stand out and come to life, and importantly, treat your team like a professional football manager would treat their team.
That would be great if everyone was managed by Klopp. I think I think they'd be in a good position. Yeah,
exactly. Be a Klopp.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's really good. So, is there any other advice, just generally talking about building for success? I think what's really apparent is, hence the title, building for success. It comes from the planning. It comes from how you start the process, rather than you know, deciding halfway through. It's about how you plan, where you need to supply resource, and where you need to show your focus. But is there any other tips you'd give around, whether it's stuff to avoid, or from your experiences, or stuff that's actually worked well when you've tried to develop teams?
No, I think you know, if it was me putting myself in the shoes of a hiring manager, I would just want the whole experience to be as engaging as possible and to stand out from the crowd. You know, if I saw an advert like this, that would have been the one I focused on the most.
To be honest, that's a really good point. It's a really good point. I think it's so hard to stand out. Say that it's so important to stand out, but actually it rarely happens. When you rarely see an advert, and I'm talking about in recruitment as well, me included. There needs to be more creativity with adverts, and I think having this type of structure, when you're talking about where a role fits into a business and how they'd come in and what they'd be involved in, what better a way than to put in something like this. And like we've already said, you can apply it to so many different things. It doesn't just have to be football, although it works very well with football. It could be so many different things. And like you said, from someone who's been searching recently and had quite a few frustrations, and also just confusion around these roles that are coming out, you're saying this type of thing would have really stood out?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you know, I could have easily, well, in fact, I used similar terminology when I was trying to explain it, but not as clear as this. So this is a bit of a light bulb moment for me the other day, when I just thought, why don't people do this? You know,
why is it not happening?
I mean, it'd make your life a lot easier, wouldn't it? I need a new Messi for the company.
You see it now. All my adverts will be football analogies.
I hope it works.
Yeah, no, it's Brilliant. But no, I really appreciate you taking the time, Phil, and the time you put into into that work as well. It's something that I will share after the episode. I'll share a bit of a diagram and also put some other bits together. I think what would also be really interesting to hear from people, if you've seen this and you have any other examples, or potentially you've done a similar thing within your role or your business, then it would be great to hear from you. So yeah, like, shares, comments, everything like that will be much appreciated. So yeah, that concludes the episode then, Phil. But really appreciate your time, and we'll keep in touch.
Thanks for talking to me.
All the best in the new role as well.
Yeah, cheers, mate. Thanks a lot.